Before I start, a couple of things about me, about the organization, those sort of things, the usual introduction. So for those of you who do not know, I am an environmental lawyer by qualification. I am dealing with more and more, I'm venturing more and more into environmental policy. I'm also a climate entrepreneur, working very closely with a lot of organizations into climate innovation as well. Uh, I am the Assistant Dean of General School of Environment Sustainability as well, for those of you who might know me from there. I run this organization, EnviPol, which is organizing the workshop today. It is an environmental consultancy which basically looks at policy review and analysis on the one hand, and we advise government, state governments, private sectors, all of this. Uh, and it also looks at skill development in sustainability. So that's also something that we ventured into. I'm also the co-director of the GPOTS Fellowship, which recently, and I'm still over the moon about it, won the most promising company of India award in the Indian Achievers Forum. And it is a 3-month online fellowship that discusses policy, diplomacy, sustainability, and how these three concepts are fluid and how they flow into each other. And the applications for the same are open. I invite you to check out the website. Also, uh, this is this is a primer for everything that is going to follow in today. I believe, and we at EnviPol believe that environment can no longer be seen as a specialization in itself. To be an environmental professional, you need to know a little about policy, a little about economics, a little about sociology, and I would argue a little about astrophysics, which is what brings me to the second slide. So I have a few things that I want to say before we start this lecture. One is a suggestion that the more we interact, the better it is. So please feel free to unmute yourself again. If you can keep the videos on, that's absolutely okay. If you can keep the videos on when you're talking to us, that's even better. If you cannot, that's absolutely understandable. I know that some of us are probably joining from our bed, so I am extremely conscious of it. The only rule that I have for our discussion is that you need to understand that this is a safe space. It's I know it's a recorded lecture, but as long as we're not hurtful towards each other, uh, it's absolutely all right. I respect and appreciate everyone giving me their opinions, political or otherwise, as the case may be. And if you have any strong opinion that challenge mine, I'm also very happy to include those in our discussion as well. So that's that. That's the rule. A couple of disclaimers. As I said, we're going to start at the very basics. I'm going to spell out what environment should be and hopefully make you challenge me. I'm also going to be, because it's a heavy duty subject, as I mentioned, so I'm going to be taking up one case study of Mumbai as an example, and then we can extrapolate it if we need to in our Q&A. These are all my views. None of the views are those of the organization and organizations I represent. And finally, a disclaimer that I do not put on the slide, but I am an absolute astrophysics nerd. So you'll see a lot of references from astrophysics, cosmology, that sort of thing. And I'm also happy to have a discussion separately about neuroscience or astrophysics. Those are the only two passions I have beyond law. So that being said, let's start with the first contextual application of astrophysics and environment, which is a very low-hanging fruit sort of a quote that I use at the beginning of every discussion. And this quote is by an astrophysicist called Carl Sagan. I'm sure some of you have heard of him. Carl Sagan was an environmental cosmologist, astrophysics educator, science educator, used to call himself. And the reason why I have this quote on the screen is because when I start with the definition of environment, and when I ask all of you to challenge me about the definition of environment, a lot of the times people ask me, all right, this lecture is supposed to be on economics of environment. So why are we dealing with what is environment? Or why are we dealing with some of the other concepts that we will be touching upon? And the reason is this, as it is said in the quote, that if you wish to make an amplifier from scratch, you need to first invent the universe. So similarly, if you want to have that risk assessment climate change apple pie at the end of this lecture. You first have to start at the very basic and understand what environment really is. So remember that with each slide, each discussion point that I have, the more you challenge yourself and the more you challenge me, the better it will be for everyone in discussion. So that's the context of where I'm coming from in terms of starting with the very basics of environment. Now let's move on to the meat of the subject, which I find to be a very ironical quote when we're talking about environment, because the meat is built in it. But I digress. So what really is environment, and something that I did not cover in my introduction is I hold a master's in environmental law and policy from Stanford University, and as soon as I graduated, I got picked up by the Economic Commission for Europe in Geneva, where one of the personal projects that I undertook was uh, I did a research over the term environment, the legal definition of the term environment, which covered 32 countries in total. And what I did was I took out the most prominent and most common words in these legal definitions of the term environment from across the globe, and I today list them out in front of you. And quite intuitively, these factors that include or that make up environment, according to the legal definition of the term, are human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, quite obviously plants, microorganisms, properties, so on
So
and so forth.
sorry to interrupt here.
Yeah.
The few candidates and like there's some some disturbance in the background. So if like the few candidates saying it, can keep the mic closer to
Okay.
when you speak
I
to
also
your
have
mouth, it might be
yeah,
more
I
audible.
also have the fan on, so I'll just switch off the fan. Maybe that's also contributing. Give
Good.
me a minute.
All right.
Nothing, water.
There's actually more disturbance at the moment.
All right. I Let me try switching to another internet, guys. Let me try that.
Now it sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I go ahead with this?
Sure.
All right. Okay. So this is not an ideal start. I hope that but then again, it can only get better than this. So
No, I mean, even if you keep the mouthpiece close, I think the other disturbance will just kind of, taken care of. Yeah, I think that will be good. Yeah.
all right. The only problem is that I use a lot of my hands, so this
Oh,
seems.
yes, I understand that.
No, but I'll keep it closer to my mouth.
Thank you so much.
No, no,
Sorry.
no. Is this better though?
Yeah, this is much better. Much
Okay,
better.
so I'll use this. So
Also, the host, if we can, just like put everyone else on mute, then also, like we can, maybe the background sound is coming from you or somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right.
Aniket, if you're there, could you put everyone on mute, please?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. So where was I? I was saying that I did this research project, very interesting, where we went about going after the definition of the term environment in 32 countries. And we picked up the most common, most prominent words in each of these definitions. And I've also added some aspects of the Indian definition of the term environment in this slide. And what you observe when you look at these factors that make up the environment, the mostly intuitive. These are things that you know should be a part of the environment, right? So you have human beings, which are the most prominent. They are the most common in all of the definitions. They make up the environment. There's water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms, property, interrelationship amongst all of these factors. So these are the typical definitions of the term environment. And at this point of time, I have, so the first few minutes are going to be questions that I'm going to keep on asking all of you. And you can unmute yourself and let me know what you think. So do you think that there are any commonalities in any of these or all of these segments of the word environment? Is there something that runs through these factors that are commonly understood to make up the environment? Okay, so my understanding was, and maybe that'll become clearer when I discuss what's missing from these terms. But my understanding was that on this understanding of the term environment, you realize that everything is driven towards human beings. So what is it that we require for our sustenance has been added to the term environment. So water is important for us, air is important for us, land is important for us, other living creatures and microorganisms, both in terms of food cycle and our own well-being, bacteria, enzymes, those sort of things are important for us. Plants are important for us. Property is something that this lecture will delve into quite rigorously. So that is important for us to understand. But everything runs through a human thread in this whole discussion. And that is what makes us think about it. That's what I hope you guys can think about and challenge yourself in thinking what could be missing from this definition. So the second question then is, if this is a totally human Anthropocene definition, then what do you think might be missing from it? Okay, Smriti, it seems like there's still a bit of an issue. Is it? Okay, so
It's very minor, but it's mostly we can hear you clearly now.
all
Yeah,
right.
we can hear you.
Yeah.
All right, great.
We don't want to break the momentum of the workshop. It's going well. It's slightly there, but now when keeping the mic closer to your mouth, you're able to hear you.
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks. So let me go back to now there's no excuse for not answering then. So biodiversity is a very good point that is missing. One would argue that other living creatures with plants and microorganisms might constitute biodiversity, but I agree that that is a little more than that. Rohit is absolutely on point when he says that interactions between flora and fauna outside of that of human beings is missing. Oceans is a new one. I've never got oceans, but yes, that's also an important point. Environment, climate change, education should that be included in the term environment? That is also a new one. I've not got that. So I'm actually very surprised with the kind of answers that I'm getting from all of you, because usually the most common answer I get to this question, what's missing, is noise. That why is noise not included in this definition of environment? And to which I usually say that, if you look at the legal definitions that courts have put forth, they've said that noise is pollution. And also in India, you also have rules beyond the definition of environment that covers certain environmental aspects. So you'll see that plastic is not here, but there are plastic rules. There are other waste management rules that are in existence. So a lot of good points here to what is missing. Ecology, and I think we're now getting there. Why is property a part of environment? That's a wonderful question, Ramit, and a lot of our lectures is going to be about it. Energy is missing, yes. So now I think the point is that we can understand that given the fact that this is the 1986 Environment Protection Act definition, give or take, we can all agree that even in the legal definition of the term environment, one that we legislate on, one that we litigate on, can be argued to be found wanting in certain aspects. And each one of the aspects that you guys are raising, from oceans to biodiversity to energy to all of those things, can be argued to be missing from environment. But I would invite all of you to think about the fact that even the things that we have put forth, all of us have put forth in the chat box, whether that's planetary bound. Okay, so I was just going to say everything that has been put forth has been human centric, and suddenly Pavitra, Ramit, and Depriya come up with other things that I was signaling at. So my point here was that most of the things that we think of noise, we think of environmental education, we think of climate change. All of these things are very driven towards a human element towards environment, and we are kind of caught between our own perception, our own senses of what environment should be, and that's absolutely okay, because you do not expect human beings to define something that goes beyond their understanding. But that dark gray area going beyond your understanding of the term is where I want all of you to venture. So, I don't know, was someone saying something? I thought someone unmuted themselves. Ramit, were you saying something?
No, I just made my point there in the box.
Okay. All right, great. So, as I was saying, we need to look beyond our own perception of our senses and think about what environment could be if it wasn't defined by human beings. And to give you an example, a couple of years back, this was a news report in one of the UK newspapers, and it's about an asteroid called Psyche 16, which has all of these precious metals: gold, platinum, iron, nickel. And the asteroid itself contains metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds. And NASA and SpaceX are planning to explore it. They're also planning to mine it somewhere in the future, for good reason, because it is 8,000 quadrillion pounds of precious metals, which we could use back home. But the question that I asked myself when I read this news piece is there any environmental law, any environmental policy, any policy at all that will either have an environmental impact on this, that will have an EIA impact assessment done for this, where there would be plastic-based rules or nuclear waste rules or any other rules that would apply to this? And the answer is a very, very vehement no. And that is because we defined environment according to our preferences, what we saw around us. It is still limited to air, land, water, property, microorganisms, plants, other living creatures. So we have defined environment to be what, in our perception, environment should be. And we haven't really taken into consideration things that were beyond our reach when we started defining environment. And it has become stagnated the environment definition. But if you think that it is absolutely okay for human beings to define environment however they perceive it to be, and for large parts, water, air, land, plants, microorganisms, other living creatures, property, all of these work just fine, I would take you through two questions that I'll put to you. And hopefully through that, we can broaden our horizons a little as well. So the first question is, what are the 4 or 5 most commonly found elements in the universe? And I know we have quite a few people from science background, so I'm looking forward to correct answers here. But the 4 or 5 most common elements found in the universe, the most abundant elements found in the universe. Okay, we have carbon by Kaushik. We have carbon, hydrogen by Rucha, helium, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. And okay, so I have basically got the answer from a couple of answers, and then Rajesh has kind of summed it up for me. So the most common elements in the universe are hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Okay, those are the most common 5 elements. I think that's the order as well. Hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Let's take helium aside because it's an inert gas for now. Let's look at what are the most common elements, most abundant elements in human beings. What are the most abundant elements in human beings? Anyone wants to give it a guess? Anyone wants to? Okay, carbon is one, yes. What else? There's a reason why I'm asking this right after the universe question. Okay, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. So that is exactly the answer that I was looking for. So if you take out helium, which is an inert gas, what you find is the most abundant elements in the universe are the same as the most abundant elements in human beings. So this should give you an understanding that human beings are absolutely minuscule portions of this vast unknown field that we barely venture into, which is the universe. And if we are such insignificant, coincidental creations of the Big Bang, then for us to take on the mantle of defining everything around us, defining what environment should be, defining how environment should be perceived, itself should be an arrogant task to undertake. Now, there's also another problem that environment faces, and that's the colloquial understanding. I'm sorry, could I request everyone to mute themselves, please? Oh, sorry, mute themselves, please. Yeah. So as I was saying that there's also a problem that environment faces from its colloquial understanding. The definition sometimes, while extremely driven towards human beings, it becomes very vague. It becomes very ambiguous because you think of the term environment, you use it for, your work environment, your pollution environment, you use it for various other things. Similarly, if you take another term dealing with environment, if you take atmosphere as an example, it means your work atmosphere, atmosphere of a certain place, atmosphere of a certain restaurant, ambience, all of those things come within these definitions. So we have made it a lot more vague, but we haven't kept it beyond what matters to human beings. Going back to what we were discussing, human beings, as one very famous astrophysicist has said, are just stardust sprinkled around the universe. If we are such minuscule parts of that big universal puzzle, then how do we expect our definition to explain something that is a lot bigger than us, something that has been here for a lot longer, will probably be here for a lot longer? Doesn't challenge your understanding of environment, then I have another exercise for all of us. If this is the timeline of our planet, all right, this football field, for those of you who are joining from the US, this soccer field, if this is the timeline of our planet, then how long do you think human beings have been here for? Any answers? It could be the penalty box, the D, the midline, the other penalty box, somewhere between the midline and the penalty box. Where do you think human beings came in? I agree with Richa. And that X could be defined on the go as well. Well inside the penalty box. So that's what Rajesh is saying. I'm assuming that he's signaling towards this side of the penalty box. Anyone else? All right. Dheeraj is saying the goalpost would be where the humans came in. Anyone else wants to take a bit of a left field view? Okay, very near to the opponent goalpost, Rohit, towards the end. Okay, so I think all of us are on the same page. For those of you who are not sure about this answer, if this is actually the timeline of football, an international sized standard football field, is the timeline of planet Earth rolled onto the football field, then human beings have only been here equivalent to the width of a single blade of grass. So while the planet has been in existence for so long, human beings have been here on a 120, 110-meter football field. We've only been here for 1/16th of an inch. And the reason why I tell you this is because to expect us to understand environment, let alone define it, is a task that is very, very difficult, because it is something that we're still discovering as we go. We're still coming up with technologies that can help us understand environment. We still, for those of you who ever doubted this, we're still discovering new species that stay on our planet within our understanding of the term environment. So for us to be expected to define something that might actually be without our understanding of environment is a bit of a task. And that's why we first need to challenge ourselves to understand what is really the definition of environment. Should it be bound by these factors that I laid out to you in our first slide? Should it be limited to these things that we have been mentioning in this discussion? And I agree, sorry, I missed the name, but we think of the destruction that, and to your exact point, Rohit, to think that the destruction has been caused by 1/16th of that timeline, let me put things in perspective for you. According to the Environment Protection Agency of the United States, 85% of all climate change harm has happened since the Second World War. So you don't even have to blame the whole human civilization and the destruction we've caused in that 1/16th of an inch. You can probably blame the 0.00001 millimeter that has existed since the Second World War, which has caused 85% of the climate harm that we are suffering today. So it's probably your generation, my generation, the generation that's supposed to come, the generation before us. Within these 4 generations, we have caused 85% of most of the harm. So I know that we usually talk of pollution since the Industrial Revolution, but the fact is that we are the most to be blamed. There are certain statistics which suggest that 30% of all harm has been caused in the past 30 years. So let's not blame all of the 1/16th of an inch. The problem that I'm trying to get at is, through this preface to the discussion that I'm going to undertake, is that at the very beginning, before we get into climate change and risk modeling and risk assessment and climate change and public health and circular economy and renewable energy and renewable energy technology and solar PVs and their economics, before all of those discussions, let's first understand what is wrong with the term environment. Because unless we're able to redefine and re-challenge ourselves to understand these concepts that we are stumbling upon, we're not doing justice to the field of study. So let's first challenge ourselves to redefine the term environment, and for it to include a lot more than just the water, air, land, property, microorganism, plants, other living creatures that we usually talk of. If we have to study and understand environmental law, policy, their cascading effects on various other things, it is also important for us to ground ourselves in why everything is human-centric. And that's because as a human civilization, we have been driven by an anthropocentric approach. And in the GPOTS fellowship, I invite you to check it out again. We go through various discussions on various ideas of environmentalism. So we go into Gaia hypothesis, deep ecology, biocentrism, ecocentrism, ecofeminism, those sort of things. But over here, I've limited myself to anthropocentric nature because the reason why we define environment to be what is most convenient for us is quite literally the result of the ethical approach that we have been undertaking. And that ethical approach presupposes humans to be the top of the chain, which is absolutely okay. Which is absolutely okay if you think that everything else can be exploited. But the reason why it starts being not okay is when you start considering everything around you to be a resource that is just there for your exploitation. So as I write on this slide, much of the anthropocentrism literature speaks of human beings creating safeguards to protect species as a means to exert control of domination over those species. So anthropocentrism has been the way to go for our species since time immemorial. If any one of us here has read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, you'll also see how he talks about agriculture and how agriculture was the one thing that, asked us to settle down. And once that started happening, once we're not busy hunting and gathering all the time, we started exploiting everything around us. So anthropocentrism has played a major role in us being content with our senses when we're defining environment. Now, there are very left field thoughts which claim that anthropocentrism can also be used, and I do subscribe to those points, but that's for another discussion. We do not have time for that. I just want to quickly throw a question to you, and this usually helps me understand how an audience thinks, what is their conception of environment. So if you agree with me, and I'm assuming most of you agree with me, that anthropocentrism is bad and humans shouldn't be the center of it all, that they should not be allowed to exploit every species around them or everything around them, every resource around them, then where do you stand on non-vegetarianism? Where do you stand on meat eating? I know it's a controversial topic, but I just want to understand if you think that meat eating comes within the domain of anthropocentrism.
Ishan, can I chime in on this question?
Yes, absolutely.
I did my master's thesis in Ladakh, and this is, for those of you who don't know, it's in high altitude part of northern India. And agriculture is, agriculturally, it's not viable. So a lot of people depend on meat. So in that context, it's very difficult for someone to even think that they should eat veggies or leaves, because it's not easily available. So I think vegetarianism is very context specific. And similarly, if you go to the coastal states of India, there are a lot of people who eat seafood because it's easily available than your carrots and cucumbers. So I guess it's very context specific.
All right. So, Deepika, what I'm going to do, and we're also getting responses from Anugya and Rajesh, who are free to jump in as well. But whoever is giving an answer to this question, could you also tell me whether you yourself are a vegetarian or not?
I am, because so the thing is, when I was a kid, I was fed seafood and things like that, but it never suited me. So my mother stopped feeding me that. But after some point, I never tried. So I've been vegetarian for a very long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But no offense against anybody who eats meat.
All right. But that's a very good point, and especially.
Ishan, if I may also add, well, I'm a non-vegetarian, but then of course, it doesn't make any sense. But I try to stick to the conventional non-vegetarian thing as minimum. I know there are many people who try out different kind of non-vegetarian, different species, meat and all, but I just stick to that. But then just to add to what Deepika said, that's what importantly I jumped into. Is that not just in Ladakh, but even in Africa, there are many communities, because in Africa, there are many places which doesn't have any green cover.
Yeah.
And they depend exclusively on animals that they rear, that they even insects
Absolutely.
they feed on. They have huge protein content which helps the communities moving, so there are population on our planet, for whom the green cover, the vegetarianism that we usually refer to, might not be an option, and non-vegetarian might also is only there for them to.
Absolutely. So it's, I think, to Ramit's and Deepika's point, for all of us, the context from which you're coming is very important. Anugya, I know you had a point. So
Yeah, I just wanted to say that at places where we can get vegetarian food, like especially in northern plateau, this central plateau, northern region in India, we have access to all kinds of vegetables and cereals. So we should not depend on non-vegetarian food. And as sir also mentioned, Ramit sir also mentioned, in Africa we do not have that privilege. So this is the same with even in Northeast India, we do not have access to vegetables, but we do have access to rice. And then what happens is that they cook with whatever insects or animals that are available to them, which is kind of sustainable because they are cultivating it, and they are eventually doing it within a region. They are not exploiting their resources.
yeah, not going
So
beyond maximum.
yes. But in central India and northern India, it is being exploited because there are options available, and people are not trying to
All right.
adjust with those options.
Point taken. So now, the reason why I ask you all this one simple yet controversial question is because I want all of you to think about the fact that anthropocentrism here and now, it is all around us, it is within all of us, it is without all of us. So I do not have any view that is worthy of being shared at this platform, but it is important for us to realize how deep-rooted anthropocentrism is. While I do subscribe to Ramit's and Deepika's views, and I also realize that before all of this happened, human beings were solely they've always been omnivorous. So it's always been both of those things as a species for us. And that goes back to our dental structures and everything. So anyway, so that's the point. And I'm glad that all of you did give it a thought. But if you think that, if you still doubt whether anthropocentrism is here and now and has been here, I have one last question for you all, at least for the time being. If I had to make you guess what city and what decade this is, what would your guesses be? You have to tell me what is this city. The three photos are from the same city, and what decade is this photo from? London, 1940s. Rohit and Rajesh are saying London. It's not London. I know you're thinking of the London smog. It isn't. It's not New York. It's not Chicago. And it's not Beijing. Rajesh and Shikhar, it is LA. It is LA of the 1960s. So you're right. And LA had a very, very serious smog pollution situation, much like what we have in Delhi in every winter now. And 1960s and 70s, for those of you who do not know, is kind of looked at as the watershed moment for environmental policy and technology, because 1960s and 70s is where you came up with policies like in the US, the states could have their own standards higher than the federal standards. In the US, you came up with policies which now have led to the CAFE standards of California. Technologically speaking, you came up with electrolytic and catalytic converters, exhaust pipes, all of those things for your cars. So everything started changing from the 60s. This smog situation was the tipping point for all of those much celebrated policy and technological interventions that happened in the 70s, that happened in the 60s. And the reason why I'm taking you all through this is because what we consider today to be the golden period of environmental policy, environmental technology, where everyone was working towards making environment better for each other. All of that happened because the smog situation at this point of time was so bad that people could not see beyond 3 meters. People could not walk out, should not have walked out without a mask as it is today. People were scared for the children, that newborns were being born with emphysema, eczema, asthma, all of those diseases. So humankind came together, at least in the US they did, and they realized that we need to do something about it, and let's have environmental policies, let's have environmental technology, so on and so forth. So that's what happened in the 60s. And that is celebrated as our major achievement of humankind and the tipping point through which environmental policy and law and technology really took off. But my question there to all of you is, did these people in your photo cause this situation in this photo? And the answer, quite obviously, is certainly not fully, maybe not even partially, because this is a result of generations of pollution that has led us to this moment. So if they had to change their behavior and they had to restrict their behavior to fall within the new environmental policy guidelines and rules and laws that came up in the 60s, 70s, why should they pay for something that their previous generations have done? And this is where we're transitioning into the beneficiary pays principle. Why should these people on your screen have to change their behaviors when they are not even the major factors that have caused this sort of pollution? Now, the corollary there is that if these people would not change their behavior, if these people are not to pay for that pollution that their ancestors and their forefathers have caused, then who will? And so I put a question to all of you. It wasn't the generation living through the 60s and 70s that was to be blamed for the LA smog. Should they have paid for it? One. If not, who should have paid for it? Two. And if you think that the answer to the who should have paid for it is their ancestors and forefathers and people who caused the pollution, then how do you hold them accountable? You know, people who've long passed and who did their deed and died. And that's where one of the most important principles in international relations, environmental diplomacy comes into the picture. The principle of common but differentiated responsibility. This is a mutation, if you will, of the beneficiary pays principle. And basically, it says that due to the culpability of the global north, due to the capacity of the global north, they should help global south with technologies and financial resources in our fight towards climate change to help environment get better. Now, if you extrapolate this, it means that the global north of today, and it is usually easier to understand this if I take an example. Take an example of a friend you have in London, or you have a cousin in London, okay? This friend of yours, friend X, who's in London, New York, any of those developed cities. This friend of yours is exactly the same as you, okay? I can see couple Akolia on my screen. Let's take couples example. So this friend X of couples is exactly same in intellect, exactly same in education, exactly same in professional opportunities, exactly same in the education that they have had, exactly same in the family background, okay? Now, according to CBDR, an extrapolation, a hypothetical extrapolation would be that X, just because he was born in London, should have to pay to couple for whatever harm X's forefathers did in the UK, you know, or as authorities under the government of UK, or, you know, as nations of UK. And to us, mostly liberal people, I'm assuming, we would think that, listen, why should someone have to pay for the sins or for the environmental plunder that has been caused by person X's forefathers, right? Why should person X have to pay for it? And these, you'd be surprised, I was in conversation with the person who drafted the Paris Climate Agreement last week. Dr. Christina Voigt is a mentor, and she was conducting a session, and one of the questions that came up was, one of the most important points that came out of it was that beneficiary pays principle in common but differentiated responsibility is still very much the main crux of arguments, even in the negotiations of Paris Agreement. Because all the developing nations say that we haven't done much to contribute to this. The developed nations say that you're not stopping to continue to pollute about it. So CBDR is still very much alive and kicking. And for those of us who think that it's just a theory or a philosophy that whose time has come and time has passed or whatever, you must realize that this is the most important factor in international diplomacy that goes on today, especially when it comes to environment. So going back to our question, should X, the person X, pay couple reparations or whatever it may be, just because something X's forefathers did 30 years back, 50 years back, 100 years back? And that's where this concept of beneficiary pays principle comes into being, that X, being the beneficiary of the plunder that his or her forefathers caused, must pay for the harm caused by them. And there are two views, like most of the things, there are two views to this. One is the conservative view, one is the communitarian view, which says that, yes, obviously he has to pay, she has to pay, because he's a part of the nation that has caused the plunder. He has a higher standard of living just by virtue of the plunder that was caused about environment. And because they have been free riding on the fruits that they're bearing for plundering the environment. And I'm not able to go into details of each of these philosophies, but I'm happy to discuss these separately, or if you do apply for the GPOS fellowship, we'll also take it up there. But if you are, so I'll just touch upon what Edmund Burke says, and I do apologize for the typo here, it's Axel Gosseries. Edmund Burke said that your identity is not a function of your death or your life. If you are born an Indian citizen, unless you go ahead and change your citizenship, you're going to die an Indian citizen. But even after your death, it isn't like 50 years later, 50 years after your death, you stop being an Indian citizen, right? You would have always been an Indian citizen. As long as you were born here, you did not change your nationality and you died here. So the point that Edmund Burke makes is that nationhood is transcendental, right? So what that means is that as a nation, if you have been committing pollution, crimes against environment, going to other states, occupying them, colonizing them, exploiting the natural resources, then you have committed a crime as a nation. And that crime, the penalties for that crime are irrespective of who was present at that point, who was the tool that was being used to commit that crime, because it's a crime of the nation. And you cannot divorce that nationhood from X as you could not divorce that nationhood from forefathers of X. So that's one of the views. And there are other views as well, that X has a better standard of living than couple in all probability, only because of the plunder that was caused by the past generations. And plunder, environmental plunder, is not the sole factor. I understand that, but it's one of the most prominent factors, and that's what we're restricting ourselves to today. Simon Caney, on the other hand, who is an Oxford professor, says that he is of the axiological individualistic point of view, who says that you cannot blame X for the pollution that his forefathers or her forefathers caused, especially when he had no or she had no control over their actions. So blame the polluter, the immediate polluter, blame the pollution, but don't blame someone who had absolutely nothing to do with it. And that's where axiological view of the beneficiary-based principle comes in, which says that you should not be holding people responsible who had nothing to do with the actions of people who caused the harm in the first place. Then we also have a problem of environmental ethics, the non-identity principle, but it's a very, very interesting problem, guys, and I'm happy to discuss it separately. I'm also happy to share a couple of articles that you might find useful, but that will have to be for another time. So why am I talking about all of this? The reason why I'm talking about all of this is that past emissions of yesterday are making people of today pay because they inherit a debt from their previous generations. But why is it relevant? It is relevant because you need to reverse this now. You need to think that now you are the polluters and your future generations are the beneficiaries. And just because you are studying environment, just because you're segregating your waste, just because you do not litter does not mean that you have zero carbon footprint. And as long as you have carbon footprint, as long as you're polluting, there will be some people who will benefit from that pollution, and those generations will have to pay for your acts today. So it is very relevant, not just in an international context, but also future policies, future strategies context of environment. But this is a bit of a morality rant that I do in my discussions. Let's take morality out of it all. Let's take a Simon Caney and Edmund Burke and Axel Gosseries and all of the environmental philosophers and ethics approaches and everything out. And for those of you who do not know, I'm a very, very big nerd of philosophy as well. I'm currently reading this book on the genealogy of morals. I invite all of you to read it. As I was saying, that let's take morality out of it. If you take morality out of it, what is the one factor that will stop the global north from providing money, resources, so on and so forth to the global south? Okay, so Saloni, I'll share some papers, articles about this. Ethical generality is, and Rohit, I like your comment. Ethical generality is what Rajesh says, but if you take ethics and morality out of it, what stops the global north from paying the global south for the environmental disasters that they have caused? And I think all of us know the right answer to this question. The answer is always money. If global south had enough money, they would not require any from the global north. If global north had enough money, they'd not mind paying the global south. So it all boils down to the economics of environment. And this is where I put a question to you without asking you to answer it, because I will answer it for all of you. If money is the only issue and we are so conscious about environmental conservation, then why not have a very, very established, well thought out legal framework for environment? Why not have a Clean Air Act that defines an Air Act that defines the standards of emissions for everyone? Why not have a Water Act that defines the standards of emissions for everyone? Without these two acts, no one would get a consent to establish a factory, industry, so on and so forth. Why not have a separate legislation on environment impact assessment notification, or rules for plastic, e-waste, biomedical waste, hazardous waste, municipal solid waste, all of those things? Why not just simply have all of these things, and that should make the environment better, because all you require is money and all you require is good policy. So why not just do this? The answer to that question is that we do already have all of these things. Almost most of the countries around the world have very, very good environmental frameworks. India, if you take especially as an example, legally we are extremely, extremely well placed when it comes to having environmental laws. We have EP Act and we have Air Act and Water Act and all of these rules that I just discussed. then why have we not been able to achieve everything that we set out to achieve for environmental conservation through these rules? And that's where I request all of you to bear with me for the next 15 minutes. And what I'm going to say next for the next couple of slides is going to seem very disconnected, but we'll come back to this discussion and it'll all make sense at the end of the slides. So keep that question to yourself for now. Why haven't all of these environmental laws and policies worked and conserved environment and solved everything? Adarsh has his views. Adarsh, I'll come to your views in a bit. Let's move on to something that will make sense in a bit. Okay, and we're going to talk about something absolutely disconnected. So if anyone has been to London, you've probably seen this, the walkie-talkie building. If you've been to London, you've probably seen the Bullet building. If you've seen Sherlock, you've probably seen the Bullet building as well. And these are some of the most impressive skyscrapers from all over the world. And this little building is what I'm going to talk about. This is called the walkie-talkie building. It was at one point in time the most expensive real estate in the world. And when we look at the walkie-talkie, we think of, expensive real estate, and we think of the locality it is in and how expensive it is and how impressive it is and those sort of things. We also think of Manhattan skyline and glass skyscrapers, and we get very impressed. It's aesthetically pleasing. But we do not think beyond the design elements that appeal to us aesthetically. Now, this is a news report of that walkie-talkie building. The story goes that a Jaguar XJ was parked right in front of this building, and the sunshine that was reflected off the building melted the car. And I find this quote to be very funny. It's absolutely ruined. Martin Lindsay told BBC referring to his Jaguar. So now I want you to think, we all know the greenhouse gas effect, greenhouse effect. It's basically when you have glass structures and they trap heat inside. I want you to think that this is the amount of heat that was reflected off the building. Imagine how much heat was trapped inside. Imagine how much was the greenhouse effect in the walkie-talkie when this was happening. And imagine the kind of air conditioning, air cooling, all of those things are required to just keep that building at a normal room temperature, let alone 16, 17, 18 degrees that we are used to. And when I explored this further, I came across this article, this interview, and it kind of sums up everything that I wanted to make clear here. We build a glass skyscraper, then have to cool that glass skyscraper because, greenhouse effect, which uses energy, cooling uses energy, which contributes to the climate crisis because you have greenhouse gases emitted, which increases the temperature further. The hotter the weather makes the glass building even harder to cool, but we have to keep cooling it because sweaty co-workers are not happy co-workers, and so the cycle goes on. So I want all of you to think for a moment beyond the aesthetically pleasing aspect of glass skyscrapers. And this is where the architects in the house and the audience today will come in, and they'll realize, and they'll tell you when you speak with them separately, and they'll echo this thought that's in the second para, that we don't want people to sweat in overheated buildings. That's not the point. The point is that with responsible architecture, you can keep people cool without unnecessary cooling. Which means that these skyscrapers that we adore and love and find aesthetically pleasing, which can melt cars by the reflection, are actually environmentally very, very costly. Not just in terms of real estate, but also in terms of the impact they have on the environment. But why do we need skyscrapers? I'm going to quickly run through the rest of the slides. But the reason we have needed glass skyscrapers is because our cities are not able to accommodate the kind of population that flocks towards the cities. We started with subsistence farming, and when we settled down, everyone started flocking to those lands which had subsistence farming. And because agriculture was taken care of, you could be employed elsewhere, and that increased the employment in that village or congregation became a metro, which meant that there are limited spaces available, which meant that the property prices went high, the valuation went high, and people started adding stories on an everyday basis. Now, is there something that controls these stories? This, because we're talking about skyscrapers. And I hope by now you understand the question that I put to you, that why, despite having everything environmental possible in our legal and legislative frameworks, our conservation efforts are still lacking. And that is because policies such as the floor space index, floor area ratio, that seem seemingly disconnected to the environment, have major effects on the environment. In the next 15 minutes of the lecture, final 15 minutes of this discussion are going to be about that. So for those of you who do not know, FAR, floor area ratio, or FSI, whatever you may call it, depending on the part of the world you're coming from, is basically the ratio to which you can construct simply. So if I have 1 square meter of land, say if this is 1 square meter, and I have my FAR in my locality is 2, that means I can construct 2 square meters of land over this, right? If it's 3, I can construct 3 square meters of land over this. So FAR is usually construction that you can construct, which is FAR into your land area. Okay, so if it's your land area is, if your plot of land is 1 square meters and you have an FAR of 2, then you can construct 2 square meters worth of built up area. And that's FSI FAR basically. And you can choose to construct it in a different way. I'm not going into the concept of BCR, but if it's 2 and you can construct 2 square meters of area on your 1 square meter of land, you can do it like this. So you can have 8 stories, you can do it like this, you can have 4 stories, or you can have just 2 stories that cover the whole land. That's absolutely up to you. But it's a very interesting point, one that all of us should note. That why are we learning about FSI and BCR in environmental economics? This is a discussion on economics of environment or economics of beneficiary-based principle. That is because of this. This is the FAR of most Indian cities, most prominent Indian cities, one could argue. And I want you to look at the island city of Mumbai as an example. And that's what is going to be our point of discussion for the next 10 minutes. The island city of Mumbai has 1.3 as its FAR, which means that an average building within the island of Mumbai, if you own a piece of land that is 1 square meters or 1 square kilometers, whatever you want to use as, it's a hypothetical, you can construct up to 1.3 square meters of built up area on your land. And why is it so low? Obviously, because the carrying capacity of the island city can barely hold the amount of people, the number of people who are staying there. So if you increase it to 20, there's absolutely no way that the island city would be able to subsist, let alone everything else. Only the waste itself would be unmanageable. So that's why the FSI is so low in Mumbai. But let's extrapolate this a little. Let's not compare it only to Indian cities. Let's compare it globally, because Mumbai is one of the major metros in the world. Mumbai is here, 1.3. Hong Kong and Chicago are at 12 for FAR. New York is 15. Singapore, I could not even include in my slide. It's about 25. So 1.3 is the FAR of Mumbai compared to others. I'm going to put out 2 numbers for all of you, and I want all of you to guess what these numbers could be. Can someone guess what 48 square feet is? Any guesses on what 48 square feet could be? Yes, Kriti, I agree. TDR is a concept and we're not touching upon it in this lecture, but I'm happy to discuss it separately as well. Anyone? What could 48 square? Okay, so Rajesh says some average. Kriti says 48 square feet is the typical area for house in Mumbai. Actually, 48 square feet is the average space available per human being in the island city of Mumbai. Which means that the average space available for a human being is a little less than 7 feet by 7 feet in the island city of Mumbai. Island part of Mumbai. If you want to know how stark that is, you have to guess what 50 square feet is. And I do not expect you all to guess this, but 50 square feet is the average size of a prison cell according to the US federal government. So according to the US federal government, average size of a prison cell should be 50 square feet. The average space available per person in the island part of Mumbai is 48 square feet. Average floor space per person in Mumbai versus average floor space of a prison cell in the US. Now, what happens when there's limitation of space? What happens when the supply is less, the demand is more? The valuation goes up, the rents go up, and not everyone can afford those rents. So 3 things happen. People either flock to slums, or they go to suburbs or establish new suburbs like such as Thane or Mathiran or whatever. Suburban sprawl increases. And once you have those suburbs, you then have to provide for transportation. So transportation increases. So seemingly unrelated policy of FSI, even though one could very strongly argue that FSI is also cruxed upon environmental carrying capacity of that region. But be that as it may, FSI as a policy has major environmental impacts in terms of the causes anticipated or not in terms of slums, suburban sprawl, transportation. All these 3 things have environmental impacts. And now I'm going to rush through the next couple of slides because you guys already know this, you're students of environment. Slums have major environmental consequences. They have socio-economic consequences. They have educational consequences. They have public health consequences. It is difficult to value the kind of socio-economic, environmental impact slums have on our being, on our environment, on our economics, all of those things. But I can still undertake to say that, all right, last year I spent $20 billion for public health infrastructure in Dharavi. I spent $2 billion for waste management. I spent $1 billion on so-and-so, $2 billion on education of kids, so-and-so, so-and-so. I come up with a dollar figure. Hypothetically speaking, it's, let's say, $50 million, billion, whatever. So I can still, incorrectly so, because I haven't considered all of the environmental impacts. I can't possibly consider the environmental impact of someone who's defecating in the open because there are no toilets. But I try and come up with a number, and I have valued the environmental and economic and social impact of having slums. Let's move a step further. We have suburban sprawls, and suburban sprawls do not happen out of nowhere. They obviously happen because there were agricultural lands and forest lands earlier and so on and so forth. And you have to pave them all because now you have to have suburbs there because the main city, because of a seemingly disconnected policy of FSI, cannot undertake to have more people. So you need to clear the forest, and they have a major environmental footprint as well. But if I have to, I can still claim that, all right, the Supreme Court said that the cost of a tree is so and so, and I have 100 trees that have to be removed. So this is the price environment has to pay. Incorrect, but you can still give it a try. Let's move a step further. transportation that now needs to be provided for the new suburbs that have come up. We can say that these are the air pollution devices that are now made mandatory to be put in cars, and they all have to be CNG now. You can come up with the policy, and you can come up with a dollar figure to be put on that transportation. So let's say that you spend $20 billion on all of these policy aspects. So it has in total cost you whatever, $50, X amount of money, due to the slums, due to the suburban sprawl, due to the transportation that happened. But these things can still be calculated. Begrudgingly, I would say that they are calculated incorrectly in most of our techniques and modeling, but they still can be calculated. But think about the unliquidated damages that are caused due to these things. Due to, again, go back to the fact that we are discussing the consequences of a policy, a land policy that probably did not have as much environmental footprint as one would have thought. This is all about the FSI that has led to this. So I'll take you through two studies, depending on whether you're an indoor person or outdoor person. I cater to both here. And I'll take you through two studies, and I'll try and explain to you how valuation is a major challenge, not just in the tangibles, but also in the intangibles. And I'm going to run through this because I am going over time now. But there was a study conducted. The study was called The Impact of Indoor Pollution, Indoor Climate on Human Cognitions, Evidence from Chess Tournaments, a working paper, where basically it was held, the conclusion was, and what happened was, this team of researchers, they used to check the indoor pollution levels in a particular room where chess tournament was going on. And then they used to check what is the error percentage that the human makes while playing the chess. And remember, a very important thing in these two case studies is who are your subjects for that study. Chess is played by people who are cognitively engaged, who are very focused, and they're conscious of the time. Remember that. Okay, so the paper realized, the study showed that a 10 microgram increase per cubic meter in PM 2.5 levels results in a 1.5 percentage point increase in the probability of a player making a meaningful error, with 9.4% larger errors. So a chess player makes 10% larger errors if there's a 10 microgram increase per cubic meter of PM 2.5. That's the impact it has on human cognition, indoor air pollution. Let's take it further, because there are some of you who might not enjoy indoor sports, and we go to baseball. And this study was conducted on baseball umpires. The study was called Air Quality and Air Quantity, Pollution Performance in a High Skill Quality Focused Occupation. Remember, the subject matters again are people who are cognitively engaged, highly focused, conscious of time, much like a baseball umpire. And they did this research across baseball games in the United States. And the conclusion was that in a 3-hour window, 1 parts per million increase in carbon monoxide causes an 11.5% increase in the propensity of umpires to make incorrect calls, so on and so forth. So we can value slums, we can value suburban sprawls, we can value transport. We can probably put a dollar figure there. And all of these are, by the way, impacts of a land policy that probably did not factor in environmental issues, or if it did not think it through. Those are the environmental impacts that can be tried to be measured. But your question would be that I'm not a chess player, I'm not a baseball umpire, I'm not a cricket umpire, why should I care for this? You should care because you need to remember that the subject matter of both of these studies were people who were highly focused, cognitively engaged, and running on limited time. So time sensitive. And now use that information to apply elsewhere. Use those examples to apply those examples to other high risk, time sensitive professions. Think of stock market brokers, think of air traffic controllers, think of surgeons, think of miners, think of students who are sitting in an examination room taking an exam which has high indoor pollution. Suddenly the student comes home and tells that his parents or her parents that I blanked out or I could not concentrate, and people think that, you know, they're not studying well enough, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. But actually, at least a partial contributor could be the indoor air pollution. The indoor air pollution that is very high because the FSI of your city does not allow FAR to go beyond 1.3, 1.52. So all of those things play a part in coming up with valuation challenges. But I want to take the surgeon example for a minute, because the policy students and the law students in the house would probably understand this. Surgeons, imagine that there's a surgeon operating and he's cognitively engaged, he's focused, it's time sensitive, and he makes a mistake because of the indoor pollution. And the patient or patient's family sues the surgeon. And the surgeon now has to pay 20,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees, 10 lakhs rupees, whatever. Would the liability be pinned on the surgeon because of medical negligence? Would it be on the government because of its FSI policy? Now the indoor air pollution was very high. Would it be a partial responsibility of the surgeon, of the government? These are things that you are still struggling to value. These are the challenges that I face on an everyday basis in my research, that all of us have to consider when we're thinking of the impacts that a policy seemingly disconnected has on all of our lives on an everyday basis. Now, I want to take you all back to that one question that I put to you at the beginning of this discussion. Actually, during the middle of this discussion, which is, why don't we just have all of these laws in place and fix everything? And as I told you, we already have all of these laws, but our planning laws, our policies, our actions, our design elements, our economics, everything that we've covered during this discussion, from governance to economics to policy to design to engineering, architecture, law, all of them have to come together to understand the valuation of environment. Because sometimes environment is valued for a lot lesser. And we have this discussion in the GPOTS fellowship on ecosystem services, which is something that all of you should check out. And I'm also happy to speak about it separately. But it's because of the unintended, unapprehended consequences of some of our other actions that seem tangentially unrelated to environment or environmental impacts or disasters that can then contribute to the problem of plenty that we have to face when it comes to climate change. So the economics of environment, in a nutshell, then has challenges that are liquidated, unliquidated, valued, unvalued, overvalued, undervalued. And all of those research, all of those computations happen on an everyday basis, but we're still struggling to find a methodology to have this. Now, usually this lecture I follow up with a lecture on circular economy or a lecture on ESGs, but it isn't possible for us to go into all of that due to the paucity of time. But I invite all of you to reach out to me directly. We obviously have been posting about the GPOTS fellowship, so you could reach out to me through that as well. And I'm happy to take up any questions. We have about 5 minutes left for this discussion before we go on to the next one. So any questions, observations, statements, happy to take them.
Yeah, Ishan, hi, Rohit this side.
Hi, Rohit.
Hi, Ishan, just an interesting comment on what I mentioned in the chat box also about my observation from how our scriptures also have, highlighted the way we can, balance out our resources in nature. And this comes from the perspective of what we were talking on vegetarianism. So yeah. just if we can just imagine a pyramid with the top of the pyramid being the human, and then coming down to four-legged beings, coming down to flying creatures, then insects, and then the bottom base of the pyramid, which is the most abundance, is the flora that we have, which is the plant life.
Okay.
And our scriptures say, and I would quote the scriptures as such, just look at the philosophy, that the bottom of the pyramid is made up of one element, and going up, these one element increases in every layer, and human is made up of 5 elements.
Okay.
So the philosophy says that if you destruct the lowest part with one element with most abundance, so you're destroying the nature the least. And hence the concept of why vegetarianism could be, and I am saying obviously the best way to live is that you destroy one element in the most abundance in the nature. You still destroy or debalance the nature. But that was an interesting thought that came out from our scriptures, and I thought I would share.
That's a very, very interesting point as well, Rohit. I did not know much about this, so really good to learn as well. And thank you for sharing this. So any other statements, comments, observation, guys? Otherwise, what we have for you is we have a 5-minute video that we'll play while I go from here, and the co-director of GPOT's fellowship, Arpit, readies himself for the next class. So, and again, what I'm also doing is, before I forget, and before I play the video and you guys get engrossed in the video and forget about me, I'm going to give you all, actually, Vidhi has my email ID, so you could reach out to Vidhi and get in touch with me directly as well. So, Aniket, if we have the video ready, Vidhi, we're going to have a 5-minute video break, and then we're going to move on to the next lecture.
Sure.
All right. Aniket?
Yeah, sure.
My pleasure. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Ishan.
My pleasure.
Nice listening to you.
My pleasure.
This is a place where you are not really a student, we are not really teachers, we are all coming together in a community of fellowship, and that's the reason why we call it a fellowship, where we think that everybody makes knowledge or builds knowledge based on the ideas that they already have in their mind.
Problem is greenhouse gas emissions that affect the temperature of the climate.
The agricultural land, the places which we use to grow crops, have a fair amount of saltwater intrusion.
Actually, the very close cooperation between the United States and China to come to an agreement to how to operationalize this principle into the future.
Policy making body on environment at the same level with the General Assembly for all other issues globally. But for environment, it established the United Nations Environment Assembly.
ION term, IOI, or impact on investment. So that's essentially what this, your management really should all be about. You try to maximize the impact of investment.
So you might define it as coordinated and synchronized action that often deliberately targets democratic states and institutions.
Someone has said, never let a crisis go to waste. So we are in a huge crisis. Let's not waste it. And instead build from it, build safer, better, and in a more holistic fashion.
I am thoroughly enjoying the fellowship. I think it's keeping me enthusiastic, lively. I'm really excited. I look forward to lectures. I look forward talking to Arpit and Ishan more often. So I'm really glad that I am a part of GPOTS. I took the right decision.
GPOTS has helped us build such a rich network of professionals who are truly global and, are actually working at the cutting edge of solving some real policy problems.
this is one go-to course that you really need in your life so that you can really enhance in your academic skills and get to push to what you really want to achieve in life when it comes to policy making, sustainability, and diplomacy.
Knowledge sharing that's happening, and it's not just learning from the mentors and the people who are taking the lectures, but it's also learning from the fellows and learning from your peers. And I think that's really amazing. And the fact that all the fellows come, like we all come from such diverse professional backgrounds, so that's really a huge plus.
So yeah, I think the amount of interactions I have had with my co-fellows and the mentors, so those have been very good. And like since we have been in a lockdown since the past 1 year, so I haven't really had the chance to interact with new people and get new perspective into my life. So I think that way the fellowship has helped me a lot. I have so many friends across the globe now, and so the key learnings have been very helpful for me.
Take away from this fellowship, which is to always be a learner and to never stop being a student.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed that little video, and also that gave you a little bit of that cognitive break that I was talking about in my lecture as well. And with that, we over to Arpit. Arpit, you can take it forward from here, and thank you, Vidhi. And I look forward to engaging with all of you in the coming time.
Thank you so much for the insightful session. I think everyone really liked it. And it's great to see a great participation. Almost 60 of them were able to join in. So that's a great participation. And thank you for keeping them all engaged. That's even much like a great thing that you can easily pull it off, I guess, in all your sessions also, even for LLM, that session that you have taken. I think they still say great things about it. So thank you, Ishan.
No, my pleasure, Vidhi. So over to Arpit. And Arpit, it's your flow now. And
sure. All right. Hi, Vidhi. Hi, everybody. So good to be here. I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
okay, perfect. So I was really enjoying, all of the questions and comments that were there in the chat box. And some of the questions and comments that I saw were around that sort of communicated this frustration that we all have, that if we have so many laws, then why don't we have all of those laws implemented to perfection on the ground? So why do we have a world where there are laws which are apparently really well designed, but then those laws do not really translate into action on the ground? And that's what we're going to be talking about. And what we're going to do right now is take a game theoretical approach to it. Game theory is a discipline where you study decision making, where you study why people behave in a particular manner, not necessarily from a behavioral economics or psychological perspective. But then nowadays, although you have a lot of game theory and behavioral economics coming together, in fact, my own personal approach is to mix up a little bit of systems thinking, behavioral economics, and game theory. But today we are, since we just have one lecture today, we are just going to focus on game theory and figure out why people are incentivized not to follow certain laws, why certain laws never translate into real action on the ground. So that's what we are going to be talking today. What would really help me when I'm taking my lecture is if at least a couple of us can have our videos on. So it's just, if I can even see one or two people in front of me, it's just easier for me to teach that way. But having said that, today we are going to be talking about an application of game theory to laws, and specifically to laws around climate change, biodiversity, and things like that. So, first things first, if we want to talk about game theory, we have to have three fundamental assumptions in place. And these are not extremely hard assumptions, although, some of you might argue that, okay, how can we, operate in a world where all of these assumptions are true? But then you can relax some of these, but it's still necessary for us to know that these assumptions are in place when we are talking about game theory. The first is the assumption of rationality. Rationality essentially means that, I want to maximize my benefits. I want to minimize my costs. So I'm an overall utility maximizer. So that's rational behavior. Now, as we all know, and if we have, stumbled upon, seminal works of behavioral economics, such as Nudge or Thinking Fast and Slow, we know that we as human beings don't operate under pure rationality. We operate under something called bounded rationality. So even if you relax the rationality assumption a little bit, our game theoretical models don't fail. They can merely adapt to that sort of a thing. But then rationality, essentially, for the purposes of this class, is I know that I am a utility maximizer. That's all about it. Okay. The second pillar of assumption is rationality is common knowledge. What does that mean? That means that rationality is something that we all know that we possess. So if we want to break it down, I know that I am rational. I know that you are rational. I know that you know that I am rational. And you know that I know that you are rational, and so on and so forth. So once we know that, we can come into a world where we can start playing games and we can expect rational behavior out of each other and out of ourselves. Okay? And the third bit is about equilibrium. So equilibrium, just for the technical sense, is that set of strategies from which nobody would want to unilaterally deviate from. You must have heard the word Nash equilibrium, especially if you've taken economics courses or game theory courses, or if you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. So John Nash is celebrated. He was given a Nobel for coming out with Nash equilibrium and a number of other mathematical applications. But Nash equilibrium is something that has been talked about by various people even before John Nash, John Stuart Mills, and a number of other people. But essentially, it is it is that set of strategies where, if you're stuck in that set of strategies, nobody want to unilaterally deviate. I'll give you an example of that really soon. Okay, so these are some fundamental assumptions that we start with when we're talking about game theory. Now, the first thing, and this will also explain you the whole concept of an equilibria, is that there are certain laws that are easily enforceable across the world. And one of the most easily enforceable laws is what side of the road do you drive on in a particular country. So the government over here just plays the role of signaling. The government randomly, selects that, okay, if we are India, we drive on the left side of the road, or if we are the US, we drive on the right side of the road. And it is in everybody's benefit to keep to the side of the road where everybody has decided to drive on. Because if everyone is driving on the left side of the road and I drive on the right side of the road, then we're going to see a crash. And if everyone is driving on the right side of the road, I drive on the left side of the road, we're going to see a crash. So it is not in my own benefit to unilaterally shift from, if everyone is on the left, then it is not in my benefit to unilaterally shift to right. If everyone shifts on the right, then that's okay. But unilaterally, I will not benefit from shifting my position. So which means that, left could be a Nash equilibrium where I am a player and the society is a player, and both of us, we play left. That's a Nash. And right is also a Nash equilibrium. If I were to model it more formally, it would look something like this. That, one player over here is the society, okay? And the society, in a payoff matrix, they play like this. They can either play left or right. So they play columns, and I am modeled over here. And the society could be a group. You could imagine it as a single person. It doesn't matter. I play rows. I could also play left and right, but then these are the rows which depict my strategy. And these blue payoffs, which are on the left side of the comma, are my payoffs, and the red payoffs, which are on the right side of the comma, are society's payoff. So now, if we are playing left as a strategy, then we have to figure out whether this is a Nash equilibrium. Okay. Now, it is a Nash equilibrium because if we are here, then I would not want to deviate from left to right, because if I unilaterally go from left to right, there's a crash, and I don't want to go from 5 to -1. Okay. Similarly, the society or the other player does not unilaterally want to move from left to right because they don't want to move from 5 to -1. So 5-5 or left-left becomes a Nash equilibrium over here. Similarly is the case over here that, if we are all driving on the right, then, I don't want to drive from, right to left and move from 5 to -1. Similarly, the society doesn't want to move from 5 to -1. So there are two Nash equilibria over here. And all that the government has to do is randomly pick one Nash equilibria and tell people that, okay, we're going to stick to this one. It doesn't need any major enforcement, although a lot of people would argue that, when you go to rural India, where you go to certain parts of India, you don't see people driving on the, correct side of the road. But those exceptions apart, driving on the same side of the road is an easy problem to solve because there are clear Nash equilibria that exist. These Nash equilibria are, good Nash equilibria, convenient Nash equilibria to coordinate around. And the government just has to give out a signal that are we a left driving society, are we a right driving society, and then people take care of the rest of it, right? Because it's in their own self-interest to stick to the equilibrium. Okay, and the equilibrium is a benign equilibrium for them. Okay, so easy problem to solve. Okay, but then there are other problems which are a little harder to solve, and we are going to be talking about this problem of collective action, this problem of managing public goods. So public goods, does anybody from the economics background, or if somebody has taken a class in microecon, do we understand the definition of public goods? It has these two elements, non-rivalry and non-excludability. So anybody who can volunteer to explain these really quickly. Anyone? Non-rivalry, non-excludability, are these terms that we have heard earlier? All right, we have some responses in the chat box. Okay, public goods are for everyone's use. Yes, that's broadly that we understand public goods are. They are not going to make profit. Okay, Mehak. Yes, certainly. So yes, those are certain features of public goods. But then when you talk about the technical definition of public goods, there are two features that come with it. Number one is non-rivalry. Number two is non-excludability. And what that essentially means is they are non-negotiable. Okay, that's an interesting point, and we're going to get right into that. So public goods, if you were to give some examples of public goods, clean air or national security, all of these things are public goods, right? Now, or even the street light in front of your house or in front of your street is a public good. Now, the non-excludability aspect of public goods is that you pay for a public good, you still get it. You don't pay for it, you still get it. So it's not going to happen one day that if you aren't paying your taxes, your national army would say that, no, we are not going to protect this person because this person hasn't paid up their taxes, right? So public goods are essentially things that you get it irrespective of the fact whether you've paid for it or not. Okay, so that's a non-excludability part of things. Okay, and the other bit is the non-rivalry part of things, which is that my consumption of the public good does not diminish your consumption of the public good. So it's like, if there's nice sunlight outside, then my consumption of that sunlight, or if there's clean air outside, then my breathing of that clean air does not really reduce the amount of clean air that you can breathe, right? So these are the two aspects that define public goods. And the challenge with public goods is that it comes with a free rider problem. What do you mean by the free rider problem? If you've worked on group assignments, you already know what the free rider problem is. That when you think that you don't really need to pay for it, you don't really need to contribute to it, because you will get it irrespective of the fact whether you do it or not. So the free rider problem, essentially when you're talking about air pollution, if you're talking about water pollution, or if you're talking about damaging the biodiversity, think of it in very intuitive terms, that whether you pay for your national army or not, you are going to be protected by them. So if you are a rational maximizer, then you are more likely to be inclined to not pay for it. And similarly, if you don't have to spend money for water treatment or waste treatment plants, and still you can get some clean water, or still you can get clean air, if you don't want to if you don't use, let's say, automobile, by not investing in that, if you can still get it, then you'd rather not invest in that, right? So that's the free rider problem that we're essentially dealing with, and we're going to get a little deeper into that now. So there are essentially 4 types of goods that we have in general, and we just discussed about public goods, which are non-rival and non-excludable. Similarly, we have something called common resource pools. So common resource pools are things which are non-excludable, but they are rival, which means that you pay for it, you get it. You don't pay for it, you still get it. But my consumption of that good reduces your consumption of that good. So think of it in terms of, fish in a particular pond in your locality. So if people eat fish and they survive on fish through that particular lake or a particular pond in that locality, essentially, they don't have to pay for it to get that fish, but my consumption of that fish reduces your consumption of that fish from that pond, right? Now, think of clean water or potable water as something which is a common resource pool, because about 3 to 3.5% of the total water in the world is really potable. And while it is, currently the world that we live in, currently it's non-excludable, which means that you pay for it, you get it, you don't pay for it, you still get it. It's a matter of right, drinking water. But my consumption of clean drinking water reduces your consumption of clean drinking water. It has a limited regenerative capacity. So if people exhaust clean drinking water beyond its regenerative capacity, then you suddenly have a water crisis, as we see in a number of cities across the country. And if you've over extracted that water, let's say from the groundwater channels, etc., then you come to a crisis point where suddenly you don't have any water to drink, and then you have to transport water from one state to another, or make it travel long distances at really high costs. So there are these common pool resources that we have. The other type of goods are quasi-public goods, and these quasi-public goods are excludable but non-rival. What does that mean? These are also called club goods. So excludable means that you pay for it, you get it. You don't pay for it, you don't get it. Okay. And they're non-rival, which means that my consumption does not reduce your consumption. So think of it in terms of, a toll road. You pay for it, you can drive on the road. You don't pay for it, you will not. But once you're driving on the road, then my consumption of that freeway does not really reduce your consumption of that freeway. Okay. Or think of it in terms of, if I put a projector inside a big hall and convert it into a movie hall, then I pay for it, I pay for the ticket, and I can watch the movie. If I don't pay for it, I don't watch the movie. But once I'm inside the movie, then my consumption of that movie, my consumption of that entertainment does not diminish your consumption of that entertainment. Unless, of course, you're one of those movie watchers who are throwing popcorns around or talking loudly on your phone, then your consumption reduces my consumption, but otherwise not. Okay, so these are club goods. And finally, you have your good old private goods, where they are both rival and they are both excludable, which means that things like your laptop, your Nike shoes, your Big Macs, that you pay for it, you get it, don't pay for it, don't get it. My consumption reduces your consumption. Okay. Now, why are we talking about this? Interestingly, if you see all of these things, the good things that make us survive, the public goods and the common resource pools, things to the right over here, we see a trend where these are gradually converting into private goods over time. Let me give you, one illustrative theoretical example, and then a couple of examples related to real environmental problems. So the illustrative example of how do I traverse this whole route of public goods to private goods, how do I create a public good into a private group good, is as follows. I was teaching a graduate level course at the San Francisco State University. And when I would come down after my class to the metro station down there would be this guy who would be playing amazing, jazz music on his saxophone out there on the station. And he had a hat that he'd keep in front of him. And if you like the music, you could just throw in $1 over here or throw in a few cents. And if you like the music and you still didn't want to pay, that was also all right. So this was something which was non-excludable. You pay for it, you get the music. You don't pay for it, you still get the music, right? Now it was also non-rival, because my enjoyment of the music standing over there does not really diminish anybody else's enjoyment of the music. Now, if I want to create that public good at that point of time into a quasi-public good, what would I do? I would pluck this guy out of the metro station. I would put this guy into a stadium, and I'd put tickets outside on the gates where I make it excludable. It's still non-rival because you come inside and your enjoyment of the music doesn't diminish another person's enjoyment of the music, but it becomes excludable. You don't pay for it, you don't get it. Okay. And if I further want to make it into a private good, then I'm going to plug this guy out of that stadium and put him into a recording studio and publish audio CDs or paid MP3s or singles out of it. Okay. So that's one illustrative way. But then from the environmental perspective, think of it in terms of how clean air is gradually converting from a pure public good to a quasi-public good. Now, if you're living in a developing country which has its own development imperatives, and they have a lot of dependence on fossil fuels and all sorts of oils and gases for their development, you are guaranteed to be in a place which is not going to have a lot of clean air. Especially developing countries, even if they're using fossil fuels, etc., they do not really have the wherewithal to treat all of the pollution that they are throwing out from their chimneys. Now, on the other hand, if you are in a developed part of the world, if you're in, let's say one of the Scandinavian countries, if you're let's say in upstate New York, these are the places where those polluting industries are not a developmental imperative, and B, even if there are industries, they have the wherewithal to treat all of the pollution or all of the waste before letting it out into the environment. So as a result, the developing economies more and more every day are more breather friendly than the developed economies are more breather friendly than the developing ones. Now think of it this way: if you're living in a developed economy, that also means that you're going to require a much higher purchasing power to be living in those economies, right? So it's expensive, of course, to live in Sweden. It's expensive to live in Norway, or it's expensive to live in upstate New York, as compared to living in Agra in India, right? So now what is happening over there? Because if it is expensive to live in some of those places, it automatically means that it is an excludable good now. So clean air, if you want to breathe, you want to be living in a place where it's going to be more expensive for you to live in. So clean air, right from being a public good, which was non-excludable, becomes excludable, and therefore converts into a quasi-public or a club good. So if you're in the club of those countries which can afford to have clean air, you have clean air. Now, funnily enough, clean air is converting into a private good as well. you find, and I can probably send you some Amazon links where you can find a small gas cylinder with a mask on it, and it'll have air from Ladakh, or it'll have air from I know the Andes, or some exotic place from Costa Rica, where the air is really supposed to be clean. And if that's something, if you're nodding your heads and if you're thinking that that's preposterous, imagine that you've been doing with that with water since a long period of time, because if potable water is a common resource pool, you would now find in many cities, especially in the developing world, and I certainly know this to be true in San Francisco, where some friends that I know of, they absolutely either just survive on sparkling water, or they don't even use tap water at all. They would buy crates and crates of your mineral water and just survive on that. So completely converted the common resource good called potable water into a private good. So that is the challenge that we are dealing with right now. And this essentially becomes a problem of prisoner's dilemma. So all of that we are seeing over here, because in public goods, it's easy for people to not pay and still expect to get it. And that's why, the pool of public good keeps reducing. You are essentially in a position of a prisoner's dilemma, where rationally it is in everyone's interest to not to invest in public goods at all. Okay, and that's the reason why public goods, they start shrinking in the domain of private goods. Now, what's a prisoner's dilemma? You must have come across the word. Typically, I show this video in the class, but then I think in the interest of time, I'll just do a very small simulation exercise that would explain to you very clearly on as to what this is going to be about. So, prisoner's dilemma. Let's say we play this game, and I can see Vidhi on my screen. So I'll just ask Vidhi to volunteer to be my co-player in this game. So Vidhi, essentially, the structure of the game is this. There are 5 apples kept inside a classroom, and these apples, think of it in terms of the goods that you have in this world. These are the resources. These could be clean air. This could be all of the nice things that we're talking about. So now 5 apples inside a classroom, and we are standing outside of the classroom, and we can either decide to play the cooperative strategy, which we also call the dove strategy, where we both cooperate and we go in, and acting in a very civil manner, we can divide these 5 apples into 2.5 each. Okay. Or alternatively, we could play the hawk strategy, wherein rather than dividing it equally, we fight over the apples. We play the non-cooperate strategy. In that scuffle that ensues, we destroy one of the apples, and then we end up, instead of 2.5, we end up with 1.5, 2 each. Okay, so one strategy is the hawk strategy, or the non-cooperate strategy. It's also called the defect strategy. And the other strategy is the dove strategy, or the cooperate strategy. Okay, so let's say now, why is it a dilemma? Because let's say even if outside of the room we decide that we are going to cooperate, both of us. Think of, if we are rational human beings, and if there is an assumption of rationality, if there's common knowledge of rationality, how are we going to pursue this? How are we going to think about this? I'm going to think, or Vidhi is going to think that, okay, what if I go in there and I'm acting really civil, slowly, coolly just walking towards the apples, and Arpit breaks the promise and decides to rush towards the apple and just capture all of them for himself. Then we'll be in this sort of situation where I end up with nothing and Arpit ends up with all of the 5 apples. And since I'm a maximizer, definitely that's not an outcome that I like to have, right? And imagine I will also be thinking exactly this. That, what if I, just act civil and I'm not really pouncing upon those apples? And what if Vidhi decides to cheat and decides to defect and runs away with all of the 5 apples? Then I'm going to be left with nothing, and she's going to have all of the 5 apples. And this is not for something that I want to end up in, because I'm a utility maximizer. So eventually what's going to happen, that irrespective of what promises we've made outside, we are going to go in and we're going to both defect. Okay. We're going to destroy one apple in the scuffle and end up with two apples each. So, what has happened over here is that even though we could have ended up in a better situation, we are in a suboptimal equilibrium just because of our rationality. And it's fair to expect this out of us, because if we were to if even one of us were to act cooperative and the other person defected, then they'd end up in 0 and the other person would end up with 5, and you don't really want that happening. Okay, if I were to formally model this, it would look something like this, where Vidhi can play defect and cooperate, I can play defect and cooperate, and look at how cooperate is not a Nash equilibrium. Because let's say hypothetically, if we are here, if we are playing cooperate, let's check whether this is an equilibrium. Will Vidhi want to, if we are both deciding to cooperate, will Vidhi be tempted to defect and move from 2.5 to 5? Yes. And if we are over here, move, yes. But on the other hand, if you look at the other one, if you look at this defect over here, this is a Nash equilibrium, because if you are here, then Vidhi would not want to move from defect to cooperate, from 2 to 0. I would not want to move from defect to cooperate, 2 to 0. So again, we are stuck over here, certainly. So this then becomes our Nash equilibrium. And now, irrespective of any law that you might have, if you have a law which says that, no guys, you have to go in and you have to cooperate, our rational behavior is not going to allow us to abide by that law. We are still going to defect. Okay. Now, what do we do about this? I will tell you really quickly, but then before that, before we get into the remedy, before we get into the strategy of coming out of this Nash equilibrium, think of how this applies as an example to the environment. So let's say, you have a river and you have, certain factories. Okay, let's say these are leather tanneries or something, which throw in a lot of waste into the river. And now, you ask, the government says, or the National Green Tribunal has come up with this mandate that all of these need to have a waste treatment plant put out over here so that they do not pollute the river. Now, what's going to happen over here? Let's think of the cost benefit calculations of this guy over here, of this factory. This guy is going to think that, okay, what if I invest, I play the cooperative game and I invest in a water treatment plant over here, and the others, they don't. If I do it, then I am spending more towards my product, which means it's going to be eating into my margins. I'm going to become less competitive in the market. And at the same time, the others, they are still polluting, so the river is still going to be dirty, right? And they are going to be more competitive in the market, so eventually I will die out, okay? And the others are also thinking that, okay, what if I play the cooperative game and the others play defect? And I spend towards the water treatment plant, and that cuts into my margins and I become uncompetitive in the market, and the others are still polluting there outside. What am I supposed to do? The river is still going to be dirty, and I'm going to get uncompetitive in the market as well. So there's no point in really investing in the water treatment or the waste treatment plant. And that's what typically happens. When you see that there are particular laws and people are not following it, you can easily identify that people are stuck in a prisoner's dilemma. They are stuck in a free rider problem. They will only move if the law does something to them, which is, our first strategy that we're going to discuss right now. That's the carrots and sticks strategy, which means that if the law enforces certain penalties on us, it is then we and that's one of the first and very basic strategies. That's how we comply. That's how we move to a better equilibrium. So let's come back to our Apple example and let's figure out how that would play out in real life. So let's say again to the Apple example over here. Let's say I see we play this game, Vidhi and I, and there's a policeman that the government has installed right out of the classroom. And the government sees Vidhi coming out of the room with 5 apples. Okay. So the government immediately recognizes that Vidhi played the hawk game. Vidhi defected. Okay. So what does that mean? That the government will put a penalty of, let's say, 4. Okay. On Vidhi. So this, instead of 5, it becomes 1 for her. All right. So if Vidhi defects, then Vidhi gets 1. The policeman simply just takes 4 of the apples from the 5 that Vidhi is coming out with from the classroom. And the same law applies to me, that if I am coming out of the classroom with all 5 apples, then the government is going to take 4 of them away. So I'm going to be left with just 1 of them. Now let's look at it. Is this still a Nash equilibrium? What we have over here is this still a Nash equilibrium over here? It is. But we have another Nash equilibrium. And that is the cooperate equilibrium, because if you are now here, then you would not want to, Vidhi would not want to move from 2.5 to 1. And I would not want to move from 2.5 to 1. So I'd rather cooperate. I'd rather just stick to the equilibrium of cooperate over here. Also do appreciate that this is still a Nash equilibrium. The bad equilibrium is still a Nash equilibrium that exists over here. Because if you're stuck in defect, then don't want to move from 2 to 0, don't want to move from 2 to 1. Sorry, 2 to 0 over here. So this is still a Nash equilibrium, but now at least you have one good Nash equilibrium as well. Earlier, when this was 5005, this was not a Nash equilibrium at all. So with this penalty, there is still no guarantee that people will not play the defect game, but at least you have a positive equilibrium, and there's at least a possibility of people moving into that better, rather than a suboptimal equilibrium to a more optimal equilibrium over here. Now, the story doesn't end here. The government can also do one more thing. The government could put further taxes or further penalties. Let me just. So this one holds as it is, that if you defected unilaterally, then the government will take 4 apples away from you. But let's say the government says that, okay, we want to just stick to this equilibrium. We don't want this to be the Nash equilibrium as well. Okay. So what if the government says that, okay, now if you both come out with just 2 apples, then what we're going to do is we're going to not only just take these 2 apples from you. If you're coming out with 2 apples, we have automatically identified that you both played the defect strategy, which means that you were both acting in uncivil manner. Not only are we going to take these 2 apples away from you, we're going to put a further penalty, or we're probably going to slap you over there as well. So we are going to move this 2-2 ka payoff to a -1 ka payoff. Okay. Now, if this is -1, then this is no longer an equilibrium at all. Because 0 is better than -1. You'd not want to be at -1. You'd rather be at 0. Similarly for me, I don't want to be at -1. I'd rather be at 0. So my only equilibrium that exists now is this 2.5, 2.5. Okay. So that's our first strategy of dealing with the prisoner's dilemma. And that strategy is carrots and sticks, mostly sticks in this case. All right. And there are behavioral economics aspects of it as well, which essentially is that, if we value losses, if we fear losses more than we, value gains, then even a little bit of loss will have more impact psychologically, or a little bit of penalty will have a disproportionately greater impact in the minds of the people. So you don't even probably have to put so many penalties, just a little bit would have the same effect. But we'll get into that. That's beyond the scope of what we are discussing today. Okay. Another strategy to escape the prisoner's dilemma is, we talked about the carrot and stick strategy. The other strategy to escape prisoner's dilemma is you play infinite games. So which means that you increase the number of stages in which the game is played, and that really causes more cooperation to come about. Now, think of it in this manner, that let's say if we were playing this game over 4 stages. So let's say Vidhi and I, we were playing the same game with these apples 4 days over and over and over again. Okay, so every day we come in, we enter the classroom, and we can decide to defect or to cooperate, and then come out with our share of apples. Now, let's say that we are, as I said, we are rational people. So we look into the future and we say that, okay, day 4, last day, what's going to happen? Last day, I know that in order to maximize, even if we were cooperating all of the days, day 1, day 2, day 3, and we were ending up with 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, on the last day, it pays me, it is in my benefit to defect, okay? Because I'm a maximizer, right? So on the last day, even if we were playing cooperate hypothetically, if I want to maximize overall, it is in my interest to defect and go to 5-0. Okay. Similarly, it is in Vidhi's interest as well to defect on the last day, because Vidhi would also be thinking exactly the same thing, that if Vidhi wants to maximize, then the only way for Vidhi to gain an advantage over me is to maximize on the last stage. But I know, and Vidhi knows, that we are both going to defect on the last stage. So what are we going to do? If I know that Vidhi is going to defect on the last stage and I want to maximize, I'm going to defect on the second last stage. Okay. And Vidhi knows that I'm going to defect on the second last stage. So Vidhi is also going to defect on the second last stage. And we both know that we are both going to defect on the second last stage. So we are both going to defect on the third last stage, and so on and so forth, right until the first stage. So eventually what we end up with is defection all the way around. But now imagine that instead of these 4 days, we had to play this game every day right up till infinity. If we had to play this game every day right up to infinity, we would be having 2 options. One is that we can just keep playing defect until infinity and stick to 2, 2, 2, 2. Or we keep playing cooperate until infinity, and there is that's the maximizing pathway, because there's no way that we would want to then defect and end up with 2, 2, 2, 2 when we can end up with 2.5 right until the end. So one way to do it is just play infinite games, and there are a number of examples for this, especially in the realm of international relations, where you see countries like France and the Great Britain, who were enemies for most of the medieval history, and then suddenly they become friends. Enter the modern industrial age and World War I, World War II. Even after that, they become the best of friends. And the reason why they became the best of friends is because they kind of realized that these 2 entities are not going anywhere. They are in infinite games. Other nation states could come in, they could change. Germany could change into the Weimar Republic, into something else. But then these 2 states, they were stable. So if you're in infinite game, there tends to be some cooperation. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but then I saw one hand going up. So if you have a question, could you unmute yourself and ask away? Was it Mehak? Mehak, did you have a question over there? All right.
Sir, I'll ask a bit later, like 2 minutes later. I'm just framing on it.
Okay, sure. Take your time, frame the question. So now think of it in this manner as well. Now, a lot of times, infinite games are not possible. So practitioners, what they essentially do is that they still get similar effects by splitting up the game into multiple stages. So let me give you an international relations example first, and then we'll come to an environmental example. So let's say if you're looking at a border dispute, and let's say this is the territory that you're looking at, and there is a line of control over here. And both the armies which are placed over here on the line of control, they decide to de-escalate. Now, de-escalation always happens in stages. So let's say both of them will decide that, okay, they'll first move a kilometer behind the line of control. All right. And that's going to be the first phase of de-escalation. The logic behind that is that, okay, let's say this army has retreated by a kilometer, but then if they were cheating, they would rush back to the LOC, but the other side has also just retreated 1 kilometer, so it gives them enough time to rush back to the LOC as well and re-establish the equilibrium. Okay, but if these folks, they do not rush back to the LOC, and if these folks also don't rush back to the LOC, then both of these have established at least some bit of trust. Okay, then they can decide to move further 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers back. And the same logic applies that when they've moved just a couple of kilometers back, they are giving each other the chance that should the other party cheat and want to rush back to the LOC, the other side also has enough chance to rush back to the LOC and reestablish equilibrium over there. So Rohit is asking, is this the game of equals? Most of the times the parties playing the game will not have equal say. How do we solve for unequal benefits in the defect strategy? Yes, so if it is unequal benefits in the defect strategy, the game would certainly change. The equilibrium of a particular game is defined by the payoffs that you have over there. So let's say, if you had a particular game, and let me just go to the singular game over here. If it was not a game of equals, then this would look something like this, that, if Vidhi is defecting, Vidhi is getting $5 apples each. If I am defecting unilaterally, then I'm maybe just able to run away with 1, and yeah, I'm not able to do anything better than that. And if that happens, that disturbs my whole Nash equilibrium, condition. So if it is not a game of equals, then obviously the payoffs would define a new equilibrium. The payoffs, typically that's the way that you look at what your particular equilibrium is. Would that answer your question?
Yeah, Arpit, I think that makes the game more complex, and I think that also creates complexity in the whole scenario, because differential benefits are being accrued to different people on the same strategy.
Yeah, so, because the thing is that let's just think of two unequal players, and if it is, let's say one player is stronger, and if it is in the interest of the stronger player to always defect, then the stronger player is always going to defect. And if it is in the weaker player's interest to always cooperate when the stronger player is defecting, they'll still always cooperate. So there you will have a new sort of a equilibria that
which is
would
defect
be
cooperate. Yeah, defect
cooperate.
Yeah.
So similarly, like if you look at a number of dating games, for example, so in dating games, a lot of times an equilibria that exists is, so typically a dating game is that one person proposes, the other person accepts. And a lot of times, the equilibria that comes out is that the best equilibria is that, one person does not propose and the other person accepts. And those are the kind of games that you play in multi-stages when you're applying for jobs as well, where, you don't show that you're super eager for the job and the other person still accepts you for the job. That's the, Nash equilibria that exists. So obviously you change the payoffs and, your equilibria definitely changes out there. Okay, now an example of how you can create stages to bring about more cooperation, let's say on the same water pollution example that we were talking about earlier. So let's say, I have again the same river, I have these 3 industries besides the river, and there is a legislation that, you have to treat all of the waste that you're throwing out in the river, and you have to invest in that treatment plant. Now, in the earlier version, we saw that people were reluctant to invest in that plant because they would become uncompetitive, and they were also thinking that what if they are the only person, the only factory that invests in this plant, and the others they don't? The river is still going to be dirty. The other players are going to survive while I'm going to die off being uncompetitive in the market, so I don't do it. Now, if you split this up into stages, you can still achieve a good outcome. Let's say the government says that, this particular plant that you have to establish, you would do it in phases. First, you'd buy certain components and the government will come, they'll check whether all of you have bought those components or not. Okay. So let's say, stage 1 complete over here, stage 1 complete over here, stage 1 complete over here. Now, if stage 1 is complete and all three know that the others have completed stage 1, this brings them to, some sort of an assurance that, they will not be the only ones who would have invested in it. So they would not be the only ones who are compromising on their profits. So they have a level playing field. And similarly, that would give them some assurance to move into stage 2. So they, bring in another component, and all that the government needs to do is to make sure that the others know that the others have brought in other components as well, and 2/3 of the work is done. And then, eventually you move in last stage and you ask them to, complete the treatment plant. And all of them have done it. And none of them is now afraid that the others may not have done it. So I would be rendered uncompetitive in the market. Everyone knows that everyone has done it. And now, since all of them have done it, the river, water also starts becoming a little better. So just by dividing this up into stages, you haven't put a penalty, you haven't really, enforced any sort of a law. You've just communicated well that, others are doing it as well. And you've asked them to move into this sort of a new equilibria and stages. This is a strategy that typically works on the ground. So we've discussed 2 strategies right now. We have 2 more to go. Strategy number 1 was carrots and sticks, penalties, rewards, change the payoffs, essentially, as what Rohit said. And the other is, increase the number of stages, and that tends to bring about a lot of cooperation. Now, there's a third strategy that exists as well, and that really works well with common pool resources. And this is the strategy that international institutions, they also adopt, because international institutions, as you already know, they don't have much of enforcement capacity or a mandate to enforce, the things that they want to get done. So let's look at this hypothetical scenario where there's a lake or there's a pond in a particular locality, which has 100 fishes at any given week. And let's assume that there are 5 households who only survive on these fishes as food. So now there's just one condition in the lake, that there's a threshold capacity of 50. So the moment the number of fishes in the lake, they go below 50, they are not able to regenerate themselves at an acceptable rate, and the fish population vanishes. So you have to, at any point of time, ensure that there are at least 50 fishes in this particular lake. Okay. And in doing so, what you do is that, typically you'd ration out the fishes that you can withdraw from for each of these households, because each of these households then would just want to withdraw 10 fishes every week. 10? Okay. And they'd be able to fulfill their household needs, and they'd also be able to maintain the pond of fishes with the optimal level of replenishment capacity. Now, what typically happens, the prisoner's dilemma over here is that, if I am this person and if I think that I can free ride a little bit and the others are not going to get to know, I'm going to, one week without letting others know, maybe I have some guests over, I'm going to withdraw 11 fishes from this pond. And I'm going to be like, okay, we are going to be fine. You really don't lose out if you extract one more fish. And let's say if another person is doing that as well, you are quickly, moving towards a situation where you have lesser than 50 fishes, fewer than 50 fishes to be withdrawn in that particular week. And the regenerative capacity of that pond is lost. And, next week you have 0 fishes, or you probably have this 2-3 fishes left and everybody is dying of hunger. So what do you do? What do you do if you are in a situation like this? Because everyone can think of it in this way that, okay, let me just extract one more fish and, it doesn't really hurt and we'll be fine. And if everyone thinks like that, if everyone is being a free rider, then you come to a position where the regenerative capacity of the pond is lost, and then eventually you have absolutely no fish at all. Think of it in terms of groundwater in cities like Bangalore and, even New Delhi, where that you should not extract groundwater beyond a particular level, but then you always think that, okay, who's watching? Let me just extract a little more groundwater, and everyone is thinking like that, and eventually one day you wake up where your city has run out of water. Absolutely. So what do you do if you're taking the institutional strategy over here? You essentially call this guy from a neighboring village, or you call one representative from each of the families and create a body. So this could be one particular guy, or a representative body, which sits over here, puts a plank out here, and first creates a rule. And that's why international systems, they are rule based. It's important for clear rules to be defined for international systems to work. And let's say you create a rule that nobody is going to draw fishes from anywhere else on the pond except for this plank that we have placed over here. So you only have to come here if you have to draw fishes, and this body or this person who's sitting over here has simply just one work to do. They're going to post how many fishes did you extract, how many fishes each household is extracted that week on this publicly visible blackboard or whiteboard or notice board. Okay. So now what happens is that if this guy withdrew 11 fishes in a particular week, then everyone else is going to know. So let's say this guy would then adjust and just withdraw 9 fishes this week. But next week, this guy will go to this guy and be like, okay, you don't draw your 10 fishes, you draw your 9 fishes because you drew 11, and I'm going to draw 11 fishes now this week, so that we can maintain equilibrium. So just by bridging the information asymmetry, or just by making information transparently available to everyone, you are creating an ecosystem of self-enforcement. So you're not allowing anybody bees or the big government and go in with carrots and sticks, but you're allowing people to self-monitor each other, or just self-adjust if somebody else has extracted more resources than you adjust this time and you extract fewer of those, and the other party, they adjust the other time and you get to extract a little more. So imagine this way, where you have not created any penalties, you've not created any incentives. All you've done is you've made information transparently available, openly available to everybody. Now, there are a couple of things. If you want the system to work, one is that this body which is sitting over here, they should have an image of incorruptibility. People should trust in them, because if these are the guys who are misreporting over here, they are favoring one party or the other, then the whole system can come down again. Okay. B, you should have trust not only in their character, but also in their competence, that they will be able to find out the right data and report it for others to look at. And that's the kind of crisis that we saw the WHO coming into. Some people thought that it is a problem of their competence. Some others, they claimed, perhaps even unfairly at times, that it is a problem with their intents. But long story short, this whole system would not work without a trust in the international institutions' competence as well as character. And it is only when you have that trust, you can trust these numbers that they put out. And if you trust these numbers that they put out, that's only when the self-monitoring or self-balancing sort of a thing that works. So that's a third strategy that we talked about. First strategy was carrots and sticks. Second strategies was increasing the number of stages. Third strategy over here is bridging information asymmetry, making information more transparent and available to the others. Okay. And the fourth strategy, and the final one that we discussed today, is about making cooperation really, really lucrative. Now, what does that mean? For that, we again have to play a game. And again, I'm going to solicit Vidhi as one of the volunteers over here. And the game is played between two players again, as earlier, Ronald and Donald. So let's say, these are two people in a particular society, and they earn, wherever you see energy, just read it as dollars or rupees. So they earn 1 rupee that they have to, or this is the amount that they owe towards taxes in a particular country. So $1 is what they owe towards taxes. And what happens with their taxes is that, both of them, they contribute, let's say, decide to contribute that $1 towards taxes that they owe. It creates a pool of $2. Okay. And those $2 are then invested into a public good. It could be security, it could be health, it could be clean air, whatever. Now, the thing with investing in public goods is that it also has positive returns. So, let's say if you have clean air, or if you have clean sanitation, good sanitation, that also means that you have better health outcomes, you have better educational outcomes. As Ishan was talking about in the previous class, that, your decision making becomes worse if you don't have clean air. So the corollary is also true, that if you have some of these good things, they have positive externalities. So there's a 1.5 time return, let's say, that you get by investing every dollar towards clean air or security or health. So you invest $2, you get $3 of benefits. That's the nature of public goods. And then, since public goods are non-excludable, everyone gets it. Let's say you divide this $3 equally into Ronald and Donald again. So they get $1.5 each, and which seems like a very fair deal, right? They invested $1 towards this public good, and they are receiving benefits worth 1.5 each. And that's a great thing to happen. Okay, so that's the first scenario where they both cooperate, and both Ronald and Donald, they agree that, okay, we are going to pay that $1. We are going to create a pool of $2. We're going to have a $1.5 time return on those $2. So a total, welfare of $3, which again gets split, and we enjoy a welfare of 1.5 each after investing $1 each. So is this bit clear? So that's the first part of the story, that they both cooperate. Now, let's say in the second part of the story, Donald, being Donald, decides that Donald will not cooperate. Donald will not invest into that public good, and would keep the $1 that they owe to the taxes to themselves. Okay. So what happens over here, Ronald, being a law-abiding sort of citizen, still invests the $1. The return on that investment is still 1.5 because you're investing towards the public good. So your total pool of invested resources is $1. It gets multiplied by 1.5. You have $1.5 as the total welfare. And since we are talking about public goods, it is not just Ronald who derives the benefit out of it. It is also Donald who derives the benefit out of it. So this is 1.5 that we have created. It gets split into both of them. Okay. So 0.75 to Ronald, 0.75 to Donald. And eventually they've ended up with this. Donald had held on to his $1. Okay. Donald still got the $0.75 that were created over here. So this is going to be 1.5. There's an error over here. This is 1.5 and this is 0.75. So over here, what happens is that Donald ends up with 1.75, held on to the original $1, did not pay taxes, and still reaped the benefits of the $0.75 that were invested. Okay. Of the $1 that was invested, converted into 1.5 and split between Ronald and Donald. So Ronald gets 0.75, Donald gets 0.75. Eventually, Ronald is on 0.75 after investing $1, and Donald is on 1.75 after investing $0. So that's another scenario where Donald defects and Ronald cooperates. Okay. And similarly, the flip of that scenario is also true, where Ronald says that, okay, I'm not doing this tax thing. Forget it, let it go to hell. But Donald decides to pay the taxes. $1 in the common pool gets converted into $1.5, split equally, 0.75, 0.75 to both. And Donald is at 0.75, Ronald is at 1.75. So that's exactly the flip of the earlier scenario. So that's also one way of playing this game. And the other way of playing this game is the final scenario is both of them say, chuck it. We are not going to invest towards any sort of taxes. We are just going to, keep our $1 to ourselves. So which means that there's no investment in the public good. There are no returns to it. So you both started with $1. You ended up with $1. Okay. Now, when you look at it, it would be easy to see over here that defect is the Nash equilibrium, because or not paying the taxes is a Nash equilibrium, because Ronald doesn't want to go from defect to cooperate, or from 1 to 0.75. Similarly, Donald doesn't want to go from defect to cooperate and 1 to 0.75. This is not a Nash equilibrium, because if you're both cooperating, then yes, Ronald wants to move from 1.5 to 1.75, and Donald wants to move from 1.5 to 1.75. So this is not a Nash equilibrium. The good cooperate one, not a Nash. Defect is a Nash equilibrium. So this is so far a very familiar story. But what if I change something? What if I change the returns that I'm getting on my investment? Okay. So instead, so this is the bit where we talk about, making cooperation really, really lucrative. So what if my returns, instead of 1.5, suddenly become 2.5? Okay. So, either because of certain policies or because of certain incentive schemes, or just the way that technology has emerged, I make investment in a particular public good, let's say clean energy, a lot more lucrative than it was earlier. So instead of a 1.5 return, I now get a 2.5 return. So similar scenario, let's say both of them cooperate, both of them, they invest $1 each, they create a pool of $2, it gets multiplied by 2.5. You have a final welfare of $5, gets divided 2.5 amongst each. So you are in a situation where you invested $1, you have 2.5 each. brilliant situation. But let's say Donald decides to defect. So Ronald invests $1, gets multiplied by 2.5, total welfare of 2.5 gets equally divided between Ronald and Donald. So eventually Ronald ends up with $1.5, Donald ends up with $2.5. $1 that Donald did not pay taxes for, so held on to that $1. And then, the 1.25 that you receive by splitting this 2.5 of welfare. So Donald is in a great position. The flip of that scenario is also possible where Donald pays, Ronald doesn't pay. So, I'm just going to rush through it and show you that, this could be a scenario as well where Ronald is holding on to the dollar, doesn't pay the taxes and eventually gets 2.25, and Donald pays the taxes and eventually gets 1.25. And finally, the same scenario, they both say that, okay, let's just not do taxes at all. Let's hold on to our $1 each. So you don't have any public good investment. So you're ending up with $1 each. So very similar. But then now over here, you see something interesting happening. If you look at this payoff matrix, which, sorry, somebody had a question over there? Okay.
Where the host can put everyone on mute. I think I see candidate Sushma. If you can put yourself on mute. Yeah.
Is that Sushma? I'll just...
Yes, it's on.
I've done that.
Perfect. So now if you look at this over here, you see something interesting happening. Now, defect is no longer the Nash equilibrium. So if you look at this, I would want to move, let's say if I'm Ronald, I would want to move from defect to cooperate. Okay, and this is also something that I think Rohit had asked earlier, that, what if the payoffs change? Okay, I would want to move from defect to cooperate, even if Donald is defecting. Okay? Because for me, 1.25 is still better than 1, right? Similarly, Donald would also want to move from 1 to 1.25 unilaterally even if I am defecting, Donald would want to move from 1 to 1.25 1.25, and this is a better set of strategies for Donald, that Donald is cooperating, I am defecting, rather than Donald defecting as well. So what you see over here is this suddenly cooperate becomes a Nash equilibrium, where if you're here, then Ronald doesn't want to move from 2.5 to 2.25, and Donald doesn't want to move from 2.5 to 2.25. So this is a veritable Nash equilibrium over here. And just appreciate what's the difference. This is the previous version with the 1.5 times the return, and this is the new version with 2.5 times the return. In the previous version, the defect thing was the Nash equilibrium, that strategy. And over here, the cooperate strategy is a Nash equilibrium. And what have we really done? We have just made cooperation a lot more lucrative, to an extent where, even unilateral cooperation is better than mutual defection. Okay. So when you've come to that stage, when you've made cooperation so much more profitable, that even if the other person is defecting, you would want to cooperate. If you are in that sort of scenario, then suddenly cooperate becomes a Nash equilibrium. And that's our final strategy that we take on. So again, 4 strategies. The first one that we talked about was carrots and sticks. The second one that we talked about was increase the number of stages. The third one that we talked about was make information more symmetric, more available, more transparent. And the fourth one that we have over here is how do you make cooperation really, really lucrative? So then we have the really hard problems. That's something that I cover during my regular course, and this is where you get into game theoretical simulations. We use the software. It's essentially a fun game that we play in the class. We talk about two books, one from Manker Olson, The Rise and Decline of Nations, and another by Robert Axelrod, The Evolution of Trust. And we figure out, various simulations on, how people can bring about cooperation by changing the number of players, by changing the players' strategies, by changing the payoffs. So we do all of that modeling, and we figure out, what are some of the better strategies to develop cooperation in the society. So with that, I'm going to end my lecture right now. And if anybody has any questions, thoughts, and comments, I'm more than happy to take it now.
I think
Go ahead. That's one small doubt, and maybe it's a doubt. It can be cleared. If you look at the left side of the screen and we look at the collective payouts in all the metrics, clearly 1.5 adds up to 3, and that is the best way to collectively look at a reward system.
Yeah.
So can if we instill a feeling of collective reward in a society, that would lead us to move from a 1-1 Nash equilibrium to 1.5. Though that might not be an individual favoring Nash equilibrium.
Well, I doubt that will work, because even if, let's say, you were to, I'm assuming that you're probably talking about something like this, that you keep this one and you, let's say, let's say this becomes 1. Okay.
No. What I'm talking is that if you add the total of individual benefits in all the blocks, Arpit, you see that the 1.5 adds up to 3, which is more than any of the remaining blocks.
Right.
That means that if we can instill a thought or a belief of cooperatism leading to a overall good.
Yes, but then you'd still have the dilemma, right? Because people are rational. So even if you go back to the game of apples that we were talking about.
But they end up getting at 1-on-1, which is a far less favoring scenario than a 1.5.
Yeah, that's right. If you're able to create a scenario where that cooperation is even over there, if you remember that had they cooperated, they would have ended up with 2.5 each, right?
Right.
So overall, they would have been better had they cooperated, but they still did not cooperate, because that's that lack of trust over there, right? But the difference over here is that if you look at the right panel over here, I would want to cooperate even if the other person is defecting, because I'm just better off cooperating over here. So if you look at the panel over here, this is absolutely fine by me. If I'm Ronald, this is absolutely fine that Donald is defecting. Donald is earning 2.5. I'm fine with that. I'm at least earning 1.5 better than I earn 1. So better than I challenge Donald and we both end up in 1-1. I'm fine by acquiescing to Donald. Let Donald earn 2.25. I'm at least earning 1.25. Okay. And similarly, that's what Donald is thinking. So the only equilibrium over here is 2.25.
Right.
Cool. Any other questions? We have something in the chat box. Let me just open that out quickly. Okay, so so I'm going to take Subhadeep's question first. Can realities of scarcity lead to inequitable distribution? Certainly, I mean, they inevitably do lead to inequitable distribution, because you have scarce resources. It's almost like you're fighting for those apples, and there are power differentials amongst people. It's not as if both of them, if they enter into a scuffle, then they are always going to end up with two apples each and destroy one. It could also be possible that one person runs away with 3 apples and the other is weaker in fighting and can only run away with 2 of those. So it will eventually lead to a lot of inequitable distribution, certainly. I'm assuming that Rohit, the question that you have posted over there in the chat box is the one that you've asked already.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that's it from my side. We can share our email addresses over here. So in case you have more questions or if you want to engage more deeply with some of these subjects, you're more than welcome to reach out and do so. So I'm just going to post my email address over here, and then we can call it today.
Thank you so much, Arpit.
Thank you, Vidhi. Let me first thank everyone in the audience. I think it was a very engaging discussion. Also, we have been trying to engage as much as possible to create curiosity, guys. So that is the ultimate aim. You can choose to do something, you can choose not to do something. That's absolutely up to you. But if you're able to challenge yourself, and that goes back to my first slide, that challenge everything that comes to you, and hopefully the conversation will keep on going. We also organize a bunch of events, including events at the New York Climate Week and so on and so forth. So if you do want to participate, please do reach out to us whenever that happens, or whenever our conferences happen. We'll keep you updated on that. Finally, thank you to the lone warrior, Vidhi. Vidhi, you have been doing an excellent job, and I have been following your career ever since you graduated and since joined WWF, and it fills me with pride to see you doing so well. So thank you so much for almost such a brilliantly orchestrated workshop here, in the one that I did with the LLM group. And yeah, let's keep engaging, and happy to clarify any doubts, and you can direct any questions that anyone might have to us. And thank you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you to both of you for today's workshop. Thank you so much. Okay. And thank you everyone who participated in today's workshop. And if there's anything, you can reach out to Ishan or Arpit directly, or if you want me to share the email IDs, you want to take this route, we can, whichever way works for any of you. If you have anything to discuss with them in detail, we can do that as well.
Yeah.
And thank you.
And again, Vidhi has our contact details, so you can write to her. She is very approachable from what it seems, so she'll be happy to reply to you as well.
Of course, I'll do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Perfect.